Let's start up. I'm Paul Costello. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, but for tonight's purposes, I'm the governor's appointed leader for his local support and community action team, which is one of the central parts of the recovery effort out of state government. The governor built a team that had three parts to it. And the first part was a set of of sort of fiscal leaders in Vermont, bank presidents, people with great expertise on federal resources and so forth, who worked as a team to counsel businesses to help them avail the best opportunity possible of capturing federal funds, to get as much PPP into the state and to get as much other grant dollars to support private sector businesses. And of course, they did a great job. Vermont probably led the nation per capita in the receipt of PPP monies. The second group was really designed to help look at the feathered reopening of businesses and what are the appropriate protocols for different kinds of businesses and how do they respond and support different sectors as they wrestle with the significant challenges that are ubiquitous with the COVID epidemic. And that group has done some very good work. Our team for local support is designed as a longer term effort. I think the governor in his wisdom realized that not all the answers to our challenges are going to come from Washington, D.C. these days. And they're not going to come just from Montpelier either. In every town in the state, there are people helping their neighbors, people stepping up to be on recovery committees or mutual support groups, people who've been helping at the food shelf or have designed new ways to help their neighbors, and from phone trees to paying attention to who needs food dropped off. And that work is, works at the most simple level, but then people are doing things for downtown reopening and for practical, systematic ways to support agriculture and food distribution. And things are spurring up from the ground all over. And so the governor was really interested in making sure that good ideas from one place are learned about elsewhere, that we share, that we figure out what's successful, and we model best practices, and then we make sure there's good communication between places to share those best practices. So we've been documenting those things. We've also sent an initial preliminary set of recommendations to the governor on some practical steps that are very important in supporting the progress of communities in COVID recovery. From these calls that we're doing at the county level, we've got several goals. One is to build a set of findings that we'll report back to the governor in terms of the things that local and regional leaders are wrestling with. What are some of the key priorities that seem to ring through these meetings that could have public policy or an investment significance to the governor and legislature? But fundamentally, we're in these sessions looking to share some best practices, to learn best practices that are going on in each county and in the towns and hamlets of those counties, and then to think about ways that you need more help, think about gaps and additional needs, and then also to think about things that you are working on and can step forward. So we're proud to have an action team, the action team supporting and behind this. But we also have a set of partners who are with us as visiting team members. And those visiting team members represent the congressional offices and Agency of Commerce. We've got Tom Berry from Senator Leahy's, Jacob Hemrick from Housing and Community Development, Sean Gilpin from Housing and Community Development, Eric Recchia from USDA Rural Development, Sheila Reed from Senator Sanders' office, Kevin Weiberg from the Community Foundation, and then
Sims from NEK Collaborative, who is horribly missing from the slide, but
Catherine Sims, and then Nick Kramer and Jenna and myself from VCRD. So really appreciate everyone being on. You wouldn't be here unless you were dedicated to moving things forward for Orleans County and for your communities, and we deeply appreciate your commitment to that work. I'm going to turn it over to Jenna, who will describe some of the work that we're going to do this evening.
All Great. Thanks, Paul, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the call. Really appreciate the visiting team being here and the steering committee, Catherine Sims and her board and others who helped pull these together. So a really quick overview, you'll see on the slide here, the agenda for the evening is we're gonna, in just a minute here, break out into 2 breakout sessions. These were topics that were chosen by the collaborative board and other partners as they think about their recovery priorities and what they would like to hear from folks in the region. And so the topics for tonight are building community unity, which Catherine Sims will facilitate, and housing, which Nick Kramer is going to lead. So we'll break out into those sessions. You're actually going to first hear from an opening kind of keynote speaker in each of those forums that will help to frame the discussion, to share strategies and recovery efforts from other parts of the state, as well as just help to kind of frame the context for the conversation. They will share up front, and then most of the session will be focused on your input and hearing from you about challenges that remain, concerns and worries going forward into the fall and winter. But also, we'd love to hear from you, what are strategies that you're working on that are emerging in your communities today? And importantly, what are some ideas and suggestions and thoughts for local, regional, and statewide action as we go forward? So, and then at the end of the session, we'll have a chance for those visiting team members that we just mentioned to share some reflections on the conversation. And then I'd invite all of you to come back at 8:10. Your facilitator and your team, your scribe and IT manager in the meeting are going to share instructions to get back to that closing session, and we'll have a chance to hear a report out from each of the groups and then some closing words.
Well, great. Well, thank you all for joining us. We are here at the Building Community Unity session. So hopefully everyone has found their way to the right place. I'm Catherine Sims. I'm the director of the Northeast Kingdom Collaborative, which is an organization that brings people together to build a vibrant, thriving Northeast Kingdom. And I'm delighted to be here facilitating this session with all of you. And as we heard in the opening session, so grateful that everyone has made time to be here together to reflect on where we are in this moment, where we want to go, and how we might get there. And I think as we heard from Paul and others, this is an opportunity for the for VCRD and the governor's action team and the resource partners to really listen to all of you about what you're experiencing, where you'd like our region to go, and how we might get there. And so really grateful to have this space to reflect with all of you. The way this portion of the agenda is structured, we'll start with a little bit of a kind of spark story from Kevin. And then we'll go through a series of questions that I'll introduce, like what do we want for our community? What's holding us back from getting there? What are some of the promising practices and strategies that we're seeing emerge? And what still needs additional action to get to where we want to go? And then we'll have a little bit of time for the recovery team at the end to offer up some strategies and resources to help the region move forward. So again, this is a time for us to walk through that series of questions and share out to the action team, and they'll take that listening and learning moving forward. And just some kind of housekeeping stuff. Encourage everyone to stay on mute during the conversation so that we can avoid feedback. And you can either use the digital raise your hand function or literally raise your hand, and can call on you as we go through the questions. To get to the digital raise hand function, if you're not familiar, there's at the bottom bar, there's a participant button. If you select that, you'll see a bunch of names and some tools pop up on the right. And one of the tools available to you is raise hands. And then I'll be able to see that you want to jump in. So let's see, I think those are all the things I'm supposed to say. Oh, and we've done a little introduction in the chat, but as you speak the first time, if you want to just introduce yourself with your name and where you're from, that will be great. Jenna, anything I'm forgetting at this point?
No, but I'm sitting here chatting with Jacob because I need him to make you co-host. I made him host and then realized I hadn't made you host so that you can see raised hands. But no, you captured everything very well.
All right, thanks. And then I'm gonna turn it over to Kevin Weiberg from the Vermont Community Foundation to start us off with a little spark story around building community unity.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to see everybody here. I've seen so many of you in little square boxes or rectangular boxes on my screen since March 18th. You know, what an interesting time to talk about unity, huh? I think Jenna asked me to talk about like what we see as the challenges to unity and what are some sort of bright spots and what are some communities doing. And I think if you're at all reading the news or paying attention, I think you're going to hear what a lot of the challenges are right now. And I would say certainly we're not immune from national politics at all. One of the things that I've been wrestling a little bit with is, you know, this idea of Vermont exceptionalism. And I love Vermont. I've lived here over 30 years. It's my home. But we have this thing about I call it multi-generationalism. And while it is proud to say my family roots go back really far to Vermont, sometimes when new people are coming, that is presented in a way of just telling people you don't actually really belong here. So I think what we've been seeing in some of these community conversations is we really have to start wrestling with some of the things that we think are we're really exceptional at. And are we that exceptional? I've sort of calling it lifting the veil on Vermont exceptionalism. I'm going to write something about that someday. But I will say one of the things that I've always bragged on in Vermont when I've gone around the country is our few degrees of separation. And I have great stories where I've insulted someone's fiance, not knowing that they were going to get married and all that sort of stuff. But I wonder now, with some of the stuff that's in the news, are we really holding each other accountable? We have in Bennington, Black Lives Matter mural being disrupted by protesters standing in the middle of the road, in the middle of the mural, someone carrying a gun and being arrested. We have Kaya Morris, of course, you know, such a high visible issue of racism in Bennington that I honestly don't think that's really been resolved. Other people might have other positions. In Vergennes, we're seeing the fracturing of community government, city government, the resignation of the mayor, people upset with the police department. And then I learned recently that the president of the Rutland area NAACP was being harassed so much by her neighbor that she needed to move for her safety and her child's safety. And these things are happening right here in Vermont. This is not Oklahoma, this is not Texas, this is not Chicago, this is right in our backyard. And so those systemic racism, I think, is also a challenge to unity. We know that Vermonters, there are protesters right now outside the Burlington police station due to 3 high-profile, high-force interactions with Black Vermonters. If you are a person of color, you have higher rates of being pulled over, being issued a ticket, having your car searched. If you are white, you have more likely to not have your car searched and more likely to be issued a warning. I think the state troopers miss me on the warnings. They just go right to the tickets. But we also know that people of color are at higher risk for poor health outcomes, including those pertaining to COVID, and as also pertaining to COVID in particular. So those, I think, are some of the challenges. Unity, I'm sure all of you probably, actually, you could be putting some of what you think those challenges are right in the chat as well. But I think we're in a different environment right now. And Vermonters need to figure out how do we adjust and move forward so that what's happening nationally does not erode what we hold precious here locally. Some of the key levers in terms of unity that we see or that we look for at the Community Foundation is local champions and volunteers. I've been working on telecommunications, and I'm amazed at what these communication union districts are accomplishing around the state. I know Catherine is part of one. The hundreds of hours of volunteer time that goes into that particular effort is just truly admirable. And we're looking at supporting CUDs as part of our COVID recovery strategy. Deep community engagement is an incredibly important lever. And it's not just getting the same people in the same folding chairs in the same room, physically distant, of course, but how do we get the people that don't ever come to town meetings for whatever reason? Many of them probably don't feel like they belong or don't feel like they've been invited. So our engagement needs to be more about talking to those who have already converted, but how do we get engaged with those other perspectives that should have an equal hearing? We look for partnerships and collaboration. Both of those speak to sustainability and collaborations, especially around creating cross-difference connections. Getting people in the same room to have a conversation. The other things that we look for really are grassroots solutions because we believe Vermonters know what Vermont needs, and Vermonters can do it better than most. So we really look for those kind of solutions that involve deep grassroots and community engagement. Some of the bright spots that we've seen throughout our COVID funding is, certainly we're seeing more community gardens and COVID victory gardens. I was really pleased to hear that Vermonters are purchasing CSAs in record numbers. And that, believe it or not, I think is a real sign of unity when you're connecting with the people that grow your food and they happen to be your neighbor, and you're keeping your money locally. There's a farm to trunk community grocery giveaway that happened today in Killington, and they were going to give away 700 bags of all locally sourced groceries. So, again, another option, another strategy to build unity. We continue to see the important role of libraries in this time in particular, even though people may not be able to go into libraries. Libraries often are providing hotspots for folks. And then there's some other things that have been happening that are really cool. Revitalizing local community stores. We've worked with the Albany Community Store to help them help the community purchase that and take ownership of it. I believe we're working with a store in East Calais. And then we've worked with Notch, which is the healthcare provider up in Franklin County, for their taking over the local grocery store, and is now called Main Street Grocery. So they've saved the one grocery store in the entire community. We've also seen local fundraising to support local businesses. Again, Vermonters know what Vermonters need, and they will step up. We've had fundraising both in Killington and Manchester. I know the Manchester fund was able to raise over $1 million. And this was not money coming directly from the VCF. This came from other local philanthropists who really wanted to support local businesses. And we have so many stories of people opening up that check and just bursting into tears, because that is the first sign of hope they've had since March. Another bright light is the Whole Shift Meals program. VCF was one of the initial investors in that when it started out with Skinny Pancake. It is now expanding around the state, and there's now this statewide Everyone Eats campaign. $5 million in CARES Act money. Restaurants will sell meals for $10, and 10% of the ingredients need to be sourced from Vermont. I could go on and on. There's so many things that really do speak to community unity. But I think I just want to leave it at that. And I'd love it if if we have time, I'd love to hear back from you what unity means to you, and what are you seeing in your part of the state?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for kicking off that conversation, highlighting both some of the barriers and challenges that we see and some of the successes that you're seeing statewide. And we'll look forward to looping back to you at the end to have a visiting team reflections on the conversation. Before we dive in, I just want to note that Jacob Hemrick is here helping scribe, and then Jenna Kowalski from VCRD is managing our IT for us and also on the visiting team. And so we'll look forward to hearing from them to reflect back at the end. But now is the part we've all been waiting for, to hear from all of you about your vision for where we want to see our community going and what building community unity looks like. And so the first question is just what do we want for our community in this area? And again, either raise your hand virtually or feel free to do it physically and can call on you. So what does building community mean, and what would you like to see for our community? Yeah, Mary T. Oh, and you're on mute.
Thanks. Just a little background. I summered in Greensboro forever as a child, went to Middlebury College, have been teaching in Dayton, Ohio until last week. When I'm back and moving to Montpelier and living in Greensboro, very much a Northeast Kingdom kind of person. But I haven't really lived here for a long time. So that's a caveat. I have been living in Yellow Springs, Ohio, home of Antioch College, if that rings a bell for anybody, where I took part most recently, and this was prompted by Kevin's comments, I took part in what's called Courageous Conversations. It's a 6-week trademark kind of set of questions, and it was with a mixed race group, and it was heavy sledding. But I'm just reminded of Biden's comment the other day. Hate has been given oxygen. It's been there all along, but it's come out. And that's worth paying attention to. You know, I was in this group with African Americans who were basically invited to share their feelings for the first time in decades, for these working people who had to stuff a lot of feelings in their day-to-day work and personal lives. And it came out in force against us Caucasians with all our white privilege. Just to say, that's very hard to hear because sometimes it feels very personal, but we need to hear it. And I would just suggest that's one thing we could think about, because divisions are not just divisions of color. Up here, we've got economic divisions. We've got flatlanders versus old timers. We've got all kinds of divisions that might be worth. In Greensboro, my goodness, we have divisions. Kevin, I was one of the folks who was busy getting what's called the Fund for Greensboro started based on a community foundation I knew in Yellow Springs, Ohio. But that is a way to try to support some of those inequalities, the deep social needs that a wealthy summer community chooses not to look at. The other thing that I found absolutely invaluable in my 25 years in Ohio was a fantastic local newspaper. We've got this Hardwick Gazette, which is struggling. Newspapers can be a mouthpiece, they can be connectors, they can tie us together, they can air our divisions, they can make us aware of stuff that's going on, whether it's local news or deep currents of state or national news. Ideally, they connect the local with the broader. But local papers are struggling everywhere. I would just like to say, is there anything we can do in the Northeast Kingdom through whatever resources, Catherine, that you're aware of, that can strengthen or increase the visibility of local papers, build more, create fora for these kinds of conversations? Because when we lose our local newspapers, we're losing something huge. We've already lost our churches for the most part. They're another place for community, but the papers really can serve. If they're good, they need sharp editors and good reporters. You know, a boring paper won't get readers, but strong papers get readers.
Thanks for that, Mary. Thanks for sharing both things from here and beyond. And what I'm hearing in your vision for what you want for our community is you want a place where we can have these courageous conversations, where we have spaces and we have tools and we're hearing and really listening to different lived experience and
We've got to hear it.
not shying away from inequity so that we can understand it and move to address it. And we can think about some of the strategies to address the question about the paper or other places that we can help support as we move along in the conversation. But thank you for helping paint a vision for what we might want for our community. Others, what comes up? What do you want to see for our community around building unity? What could that look like? What would unity look like to you, Steve Mason? And again, if you just want to start by introducing where you're from and any other.
Yeah, I'm zooming in from Lowell. I'm talking mainly as the superintendent's representative to this for the NCSU, North Country Supervisor Union. I've been the chair of that supervisor union board for 7 years, and I've been the chair out here in Lowell for 14 years. I'm a little concerned about the representation of schools in all of this. I was disappointed to see on the list of 2 groups that are represented that AOE isn't, the Agency of Education is involved, because our schools are our strongest community institutions. The last presenter talked about churches having disappeared. We've got a very active church system here in Lowell we're very proud of. But our schools throughout the 13 towns that I represent are the strongest institutions in those communities. And the challenge to the schools during the pandemic has probably been greater than to any other institution other than maybe the hospitals or the health department. And there's little recognition of that. And yet we've got hundreds of parents in all these little towns, and they've rallied around our school here in Lowell. Local businesses and individuals have contributed over $5,000 to PPE, protective gear for our teachers. We've been promised money from CARES from the federal government, but it's not come through. And my guess is because it's going through the legislature, we're not going to see as much of it as we once thought. So I just wanted to, make people aware that the schools are incredibly involved. In fact, I participate in a weekly meeting with the supervisor union's steering committee over this preparation, and it's a monumental task to get every school prepared for reopening next week. That's it.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thanks for all your service over decades in Lowell and both for the district as a whole. And thanks for highlighting the vital role that schools play for bringing people together in our community and the heroic work that has to happen now to continue to sustain and support these vital institutions that I think I would say, right, play a really important role in building unity and community within each of our towns. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Others, what is your vision for what building unity would look like in our community, and maybe 1 or 2 more reflections, and then we can move on to what's holding us back.
I'm looking for the hand waving thing here.
Yeah, or you can
I'm waving, okay.
And just dive right in. And again, if you want to just introduce where you're calling.
I'm Diane Pio, I'm from Newport. Since COVID-19 hit and we aren't doing a lot of projects that we used to do and stuff, and I don't see a lot of people. There are people in the neighborhood that that came to things, and I know them and like them, and we always got along well. And I found now that everything has moved online, particularly on Facebook, that a lot of these, I find that some of these people that I know and like have very different opinions than I do. And that's distressing, but I have tried, I think one of the important things we need to do is, because we know these people in the neighborhood, they're not just anonymous folks who have different opinions and we can just feel like we can throw every invective at them, that these are people we know. And I try to think of them as I know them, like when they came to get vegetables or something like that, while I'm responding to them, and I'm trying to remember how much I like them, that we try to put that into our comments online, so that we are being respectful and trying to find places where we agree, and to keep the dialogue open. And I think that I think we have one very successful episode of that, and on Facebook, and somebody chimed in and said, that was just really nice to see two people coming, working on a problem together from different perspectives, and not yelling at each other. So I think that that's a goal.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Diane. Right. It can be so easy to retreat into our own little bubbles online. And maybe part of what makes Vermont special is the local community, where we have connections with people with differing opinions. And how do we not shy away from that and engage in those conversations? And it sounds like maintaining that personal connection and that willingness to try to seek to understand across difference, and to listen to understand, is an important part of building unity in our communities, and that can be particularly challenged when most of our interaction is online. Thank you for that. Maybe one more reflection on what we want for our community around building unity.
This is Chris. I can't wave. I can't figure that part of that out. But
That's right. You figured out how to unmute. That's all we need. We hear you. Thank you.
What I'm on here for, I work for Let's Grow Kids. I have a family home-based childcare. So I'm here to find how we're going to give our youngest to our oldest members of our community hope. Because right now, the kingdom has struggled forever. We know that. We are used to living that way to a point, but right now we're all working with a part of our brain with fight and flight because of the stresses from COVID, and that's causing a division that we never had before. Before we were united because we were the kingdom. Now it's the mask wearers versus the non-mask wearers versus the ones that have to work, the ones that couldn't work, the ones that are unemployed. It goes on and on and on. Everybody's looking more for a reason not to belong than for a reason to belong. I've worked 26 years with children, and I've seen children usually around grade 3 start to lose hope in what their future is going to bring. Mm-hmm. And I would really like to see something come out of this group that that all generations from the youngest to the oldest could find hope and a reason to be proud of themselves, their community, and our state.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Christina. And as a mother of 2 very small children, thank you for your work every day to provide childcare to working families. And what a tough time for that for all of us. And thanks for calling attention to the importance of hope, and how do we share a common vision where we are all working to care for each other, and which it sounds like feels especially challenging in this time when there are so many ways that the stress can be dividing us. So love that vision of hope that brings us all together, and excited about the future here for all of us. So let's shift a little bit to articulate some of the things that are holding us back from achieving this vision of hope and cross-difference conversation, and listening to understand, and making Vermont a welcoming place that feels inclusive for all. What's holding us back? Steve, yeah.
I hate to mimic Bill Clinton, but it's the economy, stupid. Our economy is so transitional by season. We have little stability. Most of our parents, my experience in the schools, would suggest the average parent works 2 jobs, some 3. I'm also a field supervisor for the census, and I have 32 enumerators out there that are working 2 other jobs. It's pretty incredible. Our economy is based on multi-work environments, and we need to recognize that. And how do we get to a living wage with 1 job? Up here is a real challenge, and I don't know how to solve it.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Steve. And do you want to just draw the connection between that and sort of the sense of community? I might imagine that you see the financial pressures on families creating maybe, tension within communities because folks
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, so again, we see parents that don't have the time to volunteer, first of all, in our communities. So think of all the resources that are being tied up that would normally go to volunteerism in our community because people just don't have the time. If they're working 2 and 3 jobs, they don't have the time for their own children. And that's a fact. We see that in the school all the time. And the pandemic, of course, has really heightened that problem because the parents, first of all, are staying home, they're not working, maybe not getting paid, and they have little experience working, interacting with the school as we try and do online training. It's a tremendous opportunity for community growth that isn't being realized in this time when we should be coming together. A lot of the communities have established, phone trees and things, and I think that's great. And I think some of that community activity will carry over. But there's a lot more to be done. And this is actually the time to do it.
Yeah, thank you for that. So when so much energy is tied up just focusing on basic needs, it leaves it's hard to attend to additional community building activities. But that maybe this is a moment when so much of our world is upended that we can think about how to do things differently in a that help tend to us all in new ways. Yeah, Trish. Yeah,
part of it is I think it takes time to build confidence so that people will trust you with information that is, fact-based, the closest we can get to that, and allowing space, for disagreements, as was brought up earlier, whether it's math or guns or politics or cars or I only have 1 job, that kind of thing. And I think, certainly, again, going back to the schools, has certainly highlighted once again, that aha moment that should no longer be an aha moment is telecommunications. And, so, I know there's a lot of work going on, but it's tied up, at a pay grade higher than us from the feds, with their regulations to the state, et cetera. But, how do we, again, hold on to that focus? And, thank goodness for people like Diane, who has for years, tenaciously explored and then implemented, access, the best access, that could be available for affordable, in an affordable way in a neighborhood that needs it and wants it in Newport. So again, going back to what Steve said and what, we certainly see in Diane is, we can't, it's really hard, I'll say it personally, to not feel overwhelmed and depressed and immobilized, but we've got to push and say and pivot and, come up with, and Catherine and Kevin, you've heard me say this before, we have to really look for unlikely partnerships. People need to be asked, and we've got to ask you. The only thing they can say is no. I mean, other than that, if they're not asked, that's a no. So we need to keep doing that and, working for things that are cross-cutting in our communities.
Yeah, thanks, Trish. Yes, the issue of connectivity and broadband and lack of access is such a chronic barrier to connectivity across our region. And I'm also hearing you call attention to relationship building and working across difference, and to understand different lived experience takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, and creating a space where folks feel safe to share and to be heard is hard, and especially given the economic pressures that Steve was talking about before, but it's such important work. And I thought Mary had her hand up, but now she's disappeared. Anyone else want to call out a barrier or something that's holding us back from building unity within our communities? Or folks we haven't heard from: Shiloh, Lisa, Ruth, anything you want to add to the conversation?
Sorry, Shiloh, you're on mute if you were talking like I just was with being muted.
Mary, was there something that you wanted to,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to ask, can a meeting like this be used to think about trying to impact state funding? It just seems to me like some public funding for things like school support, or, this plague it's causing change at warp speed. All these folks who are now working from home instead of offices, a lot of the changes that are happening in online education, all this stuff. But some of what you were talking about, creative partnerships. I mean, one thing that it's just desperate across the country, I expect in Vermont as well, is daycare. How could you, maybe some places are doing this, combine daycare with senior care, long-term care, in those very protected environments, and have some cross-pollination between those different demographics. I mean, that's just one idea, but could we get some public funding for jobs, whether it's resource stewardship or any other kind of thing, more jobs that have a decent minimum wage, because Vermonters have always been multitaskers, varying with the seasons, but the return on these, I mean, look at the dairy industry. The return is just weaker and weaker. It's desperate.
Yeah. I think so. Maybe this is a good pivot to thinking about, are there promising practices or strategies or programs that you're seeing emerge in your town or our region more broadly? What are we seeing that's working as an emerging strategy to build community unity? And Mary, my son goes to Craft Spray Saplings right down the road from where you are in Greensboro. And we love that it's co-located across from the community care center, where pre-COVID times, the kids would go across the street to visit the seniors, and vice versa. And that intergenerational mixing was, I think, really enriching for both of them. Exactly. I think that's changed a little bit in COVID times, but what are we seeing within our communities that seems to be working, that maybe could be spread beyond a town or across a region? Trish, yeah.
That's something that you've actually been helping us with, Catherine, with our NEK mutual aid groups and bringing us together. There's amazing creative things that are happening by people, as Kevin was talking about earlier, that are really grassroots. And, new relationships have formed. Shiloh is now on our Facebook group. We are Lowell J. Westfield, Troy area. There's 4 towns, and we have a Facebook group, and we've learned so much, and established some new partnerships, and people have really stepped up and said, I can do this. The other thing, again, obviously, that we learned from the group, again, that you were facilitating for us, was, we were all stealing good ideas from each other. And one was, establishing a hotline, or a warm line, if you prefer, for the community, so that people felt like there was somewhere they could go to be connected to resources or help that they needed, whether it was in crisis or not. And I think that is something that certainly our leadership group is taking the long view on what matters most. And this is going to be beyond, however long this takes. But, we, as you all know, it could flood any minute. I mean, we get a bad storm and it's bad, or the snow's bad, the road goes out, whatever the case may be, a barn burns, that we're going to be using this, forevermore.
Yeah, Trish, thanks for all the work that you and your team have done, and love that it started in Lowell and spread to neighboring towns, and to see the tremendous volunteerism that emerged in the midst of this crisis, I think highlights the power within all of our communities to be resources for each other, and how simple tools like a Facebook group or monthly convening can help accelerate sharing of best practices. So thanks for all that you've been doing to care for neighboring towns during this crisis. And it's so exciting to hear that can be useful beyond this, whenever, as you said, whenever this ends. Christina, I see your virtual hand.
One of the things that I've been working on a couple of different places around Vermont and nationally in a couple of different states is the development of hubs. In childcare, it's a development of hubs to share resources, expertise, things like that. I wonder if something like that might be helpful either as a Northeast Kingdom hub or as a northern part hub or by town or community, if that would be helpful in any way, where resources and talent, best business practices, expertise in different things can all pull together so that various groups could, or several hubs, so that various groups could go there. They build connections, they stop isolation. It helps financially, it helps the people that are bringing things to the hubs. It's a win-win in a lot of situations, but I'm wondering if something like that would work within communities, so people can get out but still be comfortable, go to a place where they are getting their needs met, or they're offering services, and having that connection, if that wouldn't help pull things together by bringing people to a common place for a common reason.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I think the idea of a sort of hub and spoke model makes a lot of sense for our rural communities, that being so geographically dispersed and limited in resources, having everything everywhere, is challenging, but that by pooling resources and co-locating, there's opportunity for efficiency and cross-pollination. I know that the governor earlier this week announced an effort to build childcare hubs to support school-age kids. I think maybe Kevin Weiberg just dropped a link into WCAX's story around that how do we think about co-locating services in a way that's efficient and effective, and help maybe make some connections that might not happen otherwise. I am a part of the Northeast Kingdom Working Communities Challenge team. That's a kind of grant effort working across the region, and we're working on our implementation grant due at the end of the month. And we've been talking a lot about this concept and potentially piloting in St. Johnsbury a hub where different human services organizations co-locate together to sort of test this model. And so exciting to hear that's coming forward for you as well, and maybe certainly something that we can bring back to our closing session and continue to carry forward as a way to bring people together in our community. What else are folks hearing about as promising practices and strategies that is building community here in our region? And maybe we can just open that up a little bit more beyond what is already working. What could, if we had a magic wand or $1 million, what would we like to see? There's the hand. Steve,
just a question.
Or Mary, yeah, go ahead.
Why is Vermont so successful at containing COVID? Do you attribute that to your governor or to something about Vermonters? Do you really think it's because everyone's one cow apart, or are they willing to work together? And or just people just get it here that this is basic public health. It's not happening in the rest of the country. What's going on here? And can we use that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear folks' reactions to that. I think it is important to note that we have 600,000 people in our entire state, which is sort of a small suburb of Boston. And so we are, further apart than in most places. But Diane, it looked like you.
Well, yeah, I think if you're going to just map in fact, I did at the very beginning, mapping the incidence of COVID infections related to population density. It's just like, we are spread out, and that is, in this case, has been good for us. I think of course, there are a lot of other places. There's places in the Midwest that are also spread out, and they don't seem to have the good results that we have. So I guess there's probably some other factors, but I'm certainly that's one of them, and probably something else. And maybe we do have people that that are taking it seriously. That could be.
Yeah, we're good at maybe following direction.
Maybe.
Shiloh, I see your hand there. Yeah. And then we'll go to Christina and Steve.
Yes. So just to discuss that further, one thing that I got thinking about is it wasn't that many years ago that Vermont was rated out of a, top 10 or whatever. We were the #1 healthiest state. So obviously we know that COVID has a bigger impact on those with health issues. The CDC had just released new numbers regarding the COVID cases being, 6% of them, actually 6% of the cases were COVID only, whereas 96% had some sort of comorbidity or health issue associated with the death. So I think one thing that can attribute to our numbers is just the fact that Vermonters are healthier. And then obviously the given one is, our infrastructure and our landscape lends to us, not being overcrowded, and just in general, much, much easier. I know South Dakota as well has had really good numbers there too. And I think they're kind of in a, similar situation with being really rural and healthier as well.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And, really creates an opportunity for our state if the sort of value of rural landscapes and places that are less populated are increasingly attractive. How do we welcome people to our community, which is something that Kevin brought up earlier. How do we make everyone feel like a Vermonter and welcome in this place? I just want to go to Christina, and I know Steve wanted to say something earlier.
I think we're mainly successful because the culture of Vermont is still family-based and orientated. People care about their family members. When COVID first hit, it was protect those you love, protect them, and people were willing to sacrifice. We're also used to sacrificing. We're used to pivoting. We're used to facing challenging times and being able to pull through. So hearing that we were going to lose something to hold on to something was not as big of a jump as some parts of the country are seeing. We're used to short-term inconvenience, and because we're seasonal, short-term inconvenience, a little rough thing, and looking for, spring, waiting for the next, it's going to change. We just have to ride this out. So I think that helped our state.
Yeah, interesting. Our ability to tackle mud season made us well prepared. An important part of our values and identity, caring for each other and doing something for the greater good. Thanks. Steve, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think tying a bunch of statements that I just heard together, in Vermont, I think it's part of our farming heritage that's, farmers have always worked together. Even if you didn't like the farm next door, if you drove by the farm and his tractor was in the field and he wasn't there, I remember my uncle stopping and getting out of his truck, going up to the tractor to finish the haying in that field. He said, the old fellow must not be feeling well. It's that community help. And one of the things that I'm encouraged by, and you've probably heard me say this before, Catherine, is the growth of our small organic farms here in the Northeast Kingdom. You can't drive to Newport anymore without seeing a goat, a sheep, or a farm that has opened a small dairy and is making cheese curd. I think those are all excellent, not only community building, because the community during the pandemic has used that local resource a lot more. And I think that will continue after, because they're seeing value. They're seeing their money going to somebody local who is spending it local. So I think it's a great, I hate to introduce business and schools into this conversation, but businesses are great community builders. That's what they do. And the better they do it, the more successful they are. And you know our small town and how it works up here. It's very close, and the local farmers are very close to the community, and so I see a great. I'm encouraged by this small farm growth.
Yeah, great. I hear you speaking to the sort of creative entrepreneurial innovation within our communities, as well as the kind of neighborly ethic where we look out and care for each other. And much of that may be rooted in the agricultural heritage.
Yeah.
What else would we like to see? What do we think we could work on putting in place to address some of the challenges that our region faces and to build more community unity?
Well, I will say, if I can continue, I've taught for years at the North Country Career Center grant writing, and a lot of our small businesses have come in and written very successful grants, a brewery, some farms, and some smaller organizations. And Vermont fares very well when it writes grants at the USDA RD level, as well as state grants. So I encourage all employers that could use the benefit of a grant to do so. There's a lot of money out there to support local businesses and organizations as in the form of grants. And I was happy to see that we have one of the largest grant writers in the state participating in this conversation.
Yeah, wonderful. And, that connects back to Mary's comments earlier. Like, if we had more funding and infusion, how could we address some of the economic insecurity that maybe leads to some of the division in our communities? Yeah. Steve or others, what would we want to do with those grant dollars? So let's say we came into a windfall. What are the projects or strategies that we might invest in to advance community unity? Or I'm curious, Kevin spent a little bit of time in his introduction talking about systemic racism and some of the challenges for Black and Brown Vermonters, and how might we, in one of the most rural and most white states, in the most probably rural and white part of it, do to address bias and racism within our communities and build more collective unity. Yeah, Mary.
Just a quick thing. The town hall tradition of Vermont, which invites conversation, is unique in my experience anyway. I see Vermont is at least thinking about police reform in some towns. This is something that Vermont could be a leader on, it seems to me. The problems may not be as bad as in some other parts of the country, but to get some thoughtful folks working on that and piloting it out and trying to model what community input in police reform could look like, I think might be an opportunity. It's certainly critical.
Yeah. I mean, I think as Kevin pointed out in his introduction, Vermont is not immune to some of these national trends, and there, some attention being called to policing practices across the state. And it seems like our legislature maybe is digging into thinking about some criminal justice reform, and I was certainly pleased to see that I think it was Northeast Kingdom Human Services had the feature story about their efforts to embed mental health counselors along with the police force to go on calls, so that trained counselors were helping address some of the calls, not just always responding with force. But I think there's probably a lot of work to do there for Vermont to address some of the issues of bias that Kevin called out earlier. But Vermont's so good at being a leader. Yeah.
Getting people, communities involved in it, I think, is something we could do well. Not wait for it to be top down, or for the police department to do it on their own.
Yeah. What are others seeing? If you had a giant grant and funding, or what would you want to see our communities invest in? What are we capable of doing together? Diane, Ruth, Lisa, Mary, other folks who haven't spoken as much? Yeah, Shiloh.
So one thing that I'm really passionate about is local food systems. And so, yeah, if we had a grant, I think one thing that would be really important to invest in would be local food security for all Vermonters. I know one thing that's really hard is that I am a farmer. So I'm a farmer, and I'm also very, very low income. Our families had a really rough few years with health problems within our family. So we've had a struggle, and so we're in a very low income category. So I know what it feels like to, not be financially secure. But I also I'm a business owner, and before these issues, businesses were very successful. Our farm's been something we're building. So what I've noticed is that's a huge struggle, is that coming from the understanding of being someone that would have, if I wasn't raising my own meat, if I wasn't growing my own vegetables and making my own medicine, there would be no way for me to actually buy those products in my community, because the cost compared to going to Walmart or going to the grocery store to get these items is 10 times more expensive to get from your local farmer. So I do love that we do have a lot of good programs in Vermont, like the Vermont Farm Share, where people can get, half-priced shares through NOFA Vermont. And then we have, of course, like the WIC farm coupons. And then also you can use your EBT card to get, you get dollar-to-dollar matches when purchasing from certain farm stands or farmers markets. So I think those are all really great programs. But when I look at the statistics of, how much of our food is produced locally, and I think it was 14 or 16% of Vermont's money that we spend is on local food and drink, local food and drink was 16%. 16%, 14 to 16% was all the money we're putting into local food and drink. So I was like, are you kidding me? Vermont? And this is the percentage of our money going to local food and drink. And I was like, this is crazy. And then it got even crazier when I started looking into statistics for how many people are food insecure in Orleans County, because I live in Lowell. And it was 18%, and 16% of those being children. And so I said, well, that's very concerning, especially in we're supposed to be a farming state. So we should have plenty of food for all of our Vermonters, no matter what their income is. They should have access to our food that we grow and raise here. And when I looked at the statistics for how much food, what percentage of food, say for food shelf or food distribution, is local food, it was like 3.5%. And I know this is not to knock all of the great efforts that we have, like I just mentioned some of them. And I also know that there's many farms that donate to food shelves and donate here and there, and have great programs within their farms as well. But I just think we need to see more of it until all of our Vermonters have access to food that is really good for them. It will help, the health of their family. It'll help the food security. We've seen food shortages when the, sort of after the virus hit in the stores and things, and there was some food scarcity. And it probably is going to be an ongoing issue because we don't have enough people currently producing food in Vermont and keeping it here. So part of my focus on my farm as I expand. Right now, mostly we provide for my family. I have a family of 7. So already we consume a lot of our products and medicinals and things like that. And then whatever I do have left over, I already have customers that buy it, and I try to keep it very local. But I would like to expand, and with a particular focus to make sure that I'm not shipping my food very far. I want it to go as close as possible. And if people close and near to me can't afford it, I want to figure out, well, how do we make it affordable for everyone so that it makes sense that they're going to shop closest to them, so that if we came into a situation where we had another food shortage, we're not going to see as big a problem with that because we have farmers providing right in their communities food. So I'd really love to see, more small farms. And I would like to see these small farms have the ability to say, subsidize their food so that everyone can afford it.
Thanks. As someone who was involved in Green Mountain Farm to School before, I am with you 110% that local food is such a win-win-win for the health of our community and the health of our businesses and supporting our local economy. And, you mentioned some of the great programs that are already out there, but it's exciting to see how some of them are expanded in this crisis. And how do we sustain universal meals to kids? The Everybody Eats program, where restaurants are providing meals directly to their community. And thank you for all the work that you're doing to grow food and serve your community. And great to highlight that there's a lot more we could do around the food access issue. What else would folks like to see happen in our communities to build community? Diane. Oh, I think Diane, you're on mute.
And I hope this is on track, but if I had tons of money to put into stuff, I would put it into tech education for young people, because the world has changed and it's not going to go back. What COVID-19 did was just sort of shocked everybody into realizing that now they don't have to work in an office anymore, that they can work at home, and a lot of people, even when get things under control, they're just never going back, and that sort of filters on down for a lot of other jobs. And the technology or information technology not incompatible with our previous focus on the natural world and recreation and food and all that stuff, because it's an industry that you're not like building big factories with smokestacks and stuff. You have people sitting at computers writing code and stuff. So it's like clean and it's unless we start building data centers or something like that, which I'm sure we wouldn't be doing. So I think we really need to see how we can bring more of that in. I was really happy to see that a friend of mine, Colleen Morday Ortiz, pointed out to me that the high school curriculum for Vermont now includes science requirements, the standards involving telecommunications and things like wireless communication, understanding the electromagnetic spectrum and stuff like that, which is, I just think it's wonderful. I'm hoping that we can somehow be involved in that by finding a way that we can use the MASH as a way to provide hands-on education for kids. I don't know how that's ever going to happen, but it's in our heads, and we're trying to figure out how we could do that, because it's really crucial. I think kids are probably better off than a lot of older people, but I do find that especially amongst folks in my neighborhood, the level of lack of understanding about how the internet works is just huge, and the need for education is huge. I'm often over at people's houses helping out with stuff that, or computer use or something like that, that I didn't really understand that people weren't understanding. So there just needs to be a ton of education done, both for older people and but particularly for kids, and to try to get them into the, cybersecurity is the job of the future. And it's like $100,000 a year a job. And it's if your kid has the skills to do that, you can work at home here in your beautiful Vermont environment and be making a ton of money in a field that is absolutely going to take off because of all the people working at home. We have businesses that are not securing one office, they're now securing everybody's home, and that's just going to explode. Anyway, that's enough on that.
Yeah, thanks.
Diane, I think you hit on something, pivoting, an entrepreneurial opportunity is, finding funding for it, of course, for people to be navigators like you are, in neighborhoods and things like that, especially, for tech. And that would be, amazing. We were just hearing about the other day that somebody else, it was in a larger place than we are, but he, entrepreneurs were popping up because they have like Grubhub, to deliver meals from restaurants and things like that. But some guy started, just hooked up with a restaurant that he always used to go to. And it was, was so much easier to use that, individual to do that than, go through this big technical thing. But he was tech savvy enough to understand how it worked. So they were able to make it happen. So I think, to your point, it is that. And I think, what I'd like to see, and I think just about everybody here, is, that ubiquitous high-speed broadband is, going to, it will, it's not a panacea, but it will open so many more opportunities for equality and equity as far as being able to do so many things, as Diane was pointing out, from home or from a hub not too far from home, and get work done. So that would be on my infrastructure list right away.
And also getting computers to lower income families. We're trying to work on that, and helping them learn how to use them, because it's good for kids growing up, even little kids, to see their parents like at a desktop, maybe, instead of on a phone all the time. People need to not be on their phones. They need to not be interacting with the internet on a phone, because when they get into a job, that's not where they're going to be doing their job. They're going to be sitting at a real computer, and kids need to learn how to do that. And their parents should be the role models if there's a computer in the home. And they're expensive, but what we found that we can refurbish. We had a lot of donations to old computers that have their firmware is not good anymore. We can put new firmware on them, and they're good enough for a family to use. And it just, we just need to have a lot more people who are willing to help with the education to do that.
Great. Yeah, thank you both for highlighting the infrastructure and equipment needs, but that if we have those in place, there is tremendous opportunity for careers for the future for our region, if we have the education and the tools.
It's not incompatible with the food and the recreation. It's a thing that really goes well with it. I mean, it's right, should be right in there. It's like the two ends of the spectrum, your trees and your computer.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks. Ruth. Yeah.
Along those lines, I'm thinking getting, tablets or computers out to seniors too, because especially during COVID, and for disabled people, they tend to feel more alone. So of having more of that connection available, and like you said, the devices are what is missing. I mean, because they can't all afford it. So I think that would be great to just get them more connected. But
also the education, because I find that, you can give someone that's not had a lot of experience, maybe in the last 20 years with the computer, who's an older person, who has some knowledge, and you can give them the computer, and this actually happened that within 24 hours they have downloaded malware. So you need to be available to go to their home and be able to help them learn how to use it, because they're probably not going to come out and go to a class somewhere, because that's
Right.
happen, especially now. So you need to have people who can go out and help people work through things. It's a long learning process.
Great, thanks for all that. What else do we want to see for our communities? What actions are needed, locally, regionally, or at the state level to help us work towards this equitable recovery that builds community for all? Mary, yeah.
Sorry, this is sort of at the state level, but public health has been decimated in its funding for 50 years. This pandemic is certainly drawing attention to the need for effective public health systems, but how's Vermont doing that way? Do you think your public health state and locally is doing all it could? It's what keeps us healthy, more than medicine. And
yeah, what do folks think about that? How is Orleans County doing from a public health perspective? We feel pretty fortunate to have such a number of hospitals that are high quality within our region, that are accessible. But
is your food inspection, is your immunization programs, are your disease containment and reporting programs in place? Is there funding so that adequate personnel are doing contact tracing right now? I don't know.
Yeah, what do folks think? I think some of our low case count and the ranking as one of the healthiest states is a testament to those systems being in place and working well. But what do others feel?
It just came out that, I think it was this week, that Orleans County has the least amount. So we're in the state that has the smallest amount of positivity, and we live in the county that has the smallest amount of positivity of the state, the entire state. So I think, we've been connecting through our group and having different people speak every week, and it's built our confidence in the different service agencies that, work with us, and how important it is for all of us to connect with them. They're really busy. They're doing a lot of things, but if they don't hear from us as far as what our needs are, or we have something to offer you, agency, an opportunity, this is what we have, it just goes, nobody knows about it, right? So it's really important, I think, again, maybe Catherine addressing that question is, in addition to infrastructure, I would like to see increased coaching for proactivity from all of us in our communications to, break down those silos too. A lot of times the power comes from the grassroots organizations of people to break down those silos, because you'll be talking with one agency and the other agency you would think would know about that, but they don't. So you become the connector. It's like, well, this is what we heard from housing. This is what we heard from transportation. Seems to me that the solution is, work with you two working with each other. And I think that, again, this crisis is giving us more opportunity to connect and be proactive. And as tired as we are, as confused as we are, I think, and frustrated, it really is healthy for us to well, now I have time to do this. So I have more time to do this. So is really pushing, again, the unlikely partnerships, as well as alerting, communicating, establishing relationships and partnerships, with agencies that we know of, so that they can better work together to serve our communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Trish, some of the things you're pointing to, we've heard in our Working Communities Challenge effort that, you know, there are a number of great supports and agencies and services, but that the approach may not be as human-centered and trauma-informed as possible. That, you know, if one needs help, the number of different doors that you have to enter and different surveys and the number of questions that, you know, may not be as supportive. The hoops that one has to jump to is often a barrier, and that there's more that we can do to help folks navigate that system and make it as streamlined and accessible and inclusive, and sort of non-triggering, that there's work to do there.
Are you talking about like domestic violence kinds of things?
Or any, you know, or accessing housing or accessing food supports, or
I see.
You know, that like each of those have their own separate door. They have their own surveys that may or may not be as you know, thoughtfully developed. You know, and the especially if you're coming, you know, at a time of great need, are we designing things because of what the agency needs, or because of what the individual needs? And that there's work to, you know, that the hubs can help address that in a way.
You suggest that maybe it would be
serve?
helpful to do a needs assessment.
We have many of those.
Maybe you do. I'm just thinking now of the stresses that we, again, I feel like I'm recently arrived, but the stresses, the mental health stresses of this pandemic on the shut-in elderly, be it in a care facility or at home, isolated, the domestic and child abuse, the substance users, what's going on with them? You know, there's a lot of stressors out there that.
And I think something that's come up a lot in other conversations that I've been a part of is this idea of really robust community engagement and leadership development within communities with lived experience, that the solutions should not be designed necessarily by the agencies coming up with a solution for someone else, that the users and the beneficiaries should be designing and helping co-create solutions to address the challenges that our communities face, and that there's a lot of room for deep listening and learning and ensuring that diverse voices and perspectives are at the table, not just to be surveyed, but to really help design and create the solutions. So I'm just looking at the time and noticing that, you know, now we want to kind of be shifting to wrapping up and reflecting. And so I'd like to invite our visiting team and resource partners to reflect a little bit on what you've heard and bring forward maybe strategies and resources that you think might be available to Orleans County that they might learn from. So Jenna, maybe if we want to start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I guess my first reflection, Catherine, is thank you for facilitating this session. You're such an excellent facilitator, and it's like such a luxury for me to just like sit back and listen and not have to be in charge of the conversation.
I've facilitated like 30 of these over the last few months.
I've done a few of these, so this was wonderful. And just thank you, all of you, for sharing your reflections. And this was a really rich conversation and really thoughtful. And I also know several of you and know how much you're doing in your communities to build unity and to support each other and bring people together. So just thank you to all of you. And I guess my just reflection on the topic generally is like building community unity. I think we saw that in this conversation, that it just means so many things. Like there isn't one answer to building unity. You know, in some cases it's about, you know, cultivating local food, as Shiloh said, and sharing meals together and coming together in that way. In some cases it's a physical place or a hub. In some cases it's virtual space and connection that a lot of people were sharing, but also community events and thriving village centers and businesses. And someone mentioned local news, the local paper. All of those, and then more like less formal hubs of communication, social media and local newsletters and Front Porch Forum, whatever it is. So there's just so many things that connect us as communities. And I think Vermont has so many assets when it comes to that. Like a lot of our community, especially in the Kingdom. I mean, I work with communities all around the state, and Kingdom, I've worked with many Kingdom communities, and some of those are the most connected and towns with the most sense of community, I would say, I've encountered in the Kingdom, and where people are used to coming together. People feel that community is important, and there's a lot of assets there. But I think we named in this call a lot of challenges that we face in Vermont, and I think like one of the first challenges for us in a state is like acknowledging that problem that we have, that like these, systemic racism and other divisions are happening here, and they're very real. And in some cases, I've heard people of color say, it kind of feels worse here than in other places. We have this insidious form of racism, which is that we're all really comfortable and happy and think we're doing great. But in fact, people feel unwelcome and left out. And so even our communities where we see so much unity and connection, it's really important to ask that question about like who's not involved and who isn't feeling that. And we hear from people all the time that aren't feeling this connection. So anyway, just to say that like, I just really value this conversation because this is a group of people who do acknowledge that and are recognizing that and are doing so much work to bring people into the conversation. I don't see Diane anymore, but she's someone that really stands out to me in Newport doing that work to bring people into the fold. So just some reflections, but I did want to share just some resources really quick that I was just thinking about as the conversation was going. One is that Catherine and the NEK Collaborative is, having that sort of regional connector in the Kingdom is really unique to the Northeast Kingdom. There aren't other organizations like the Collaborative in the state. And when I think about assets for connecting and building unity, that is one of them. And so I'd encourage folks, if you're not, to connect through that. And of course, the Working Communities work that you mentioned. And then we're going to hear from Kevin at the Vermont Community Foundation. Whenever people in communities mention building unity or any sort of initiatives that do that, I point them to Kevin and to the Community Foundation because that is an organization that has recognized the importance of this work. And then I also want to share two other things. I'm going to share the links in the chat. One is, so the governor's action team that Paul is chairing and that has done some of this work and is hosting these forums, has put up a website that has a couple things that might be interesting for you to check out. One page is a whole list of things that lots of communities have done. Some are Kingdom communities, some are from other parts of the state that have done a lot of work around this unity building. And then another one is that action team, a subcommittee developed a guide for municipalities on diversity, equity, and inclusion that I think is a valuable resource. So I'll share those in there as just like something to check out and see if it is something that would work in your community. Thanks, Catherine.
Oh, thank you, Jenna. Kevin, you want to provide some reflections, resources, strategies?
I think it's been a great conversation too. I feel like I set us off with a little bit of a scattershot approach to this conversation, but yeah, and there's a couple, some of the things that you've talked about are some things that the Community Foundation is working on actively. One is broadband. So we are working, and Catherine's connected with that. So we're working with the different communications union districts around the state. The other thing is that we don't have, one of our initiatives is we've identified it as welcoming non-racist communities. So a lot of these community conversations that you're talking about, I think are something that the Community Foundation would definitely entertain funding. What we don't have quite yet is the formal structure around how we're going to do that. So Catherine, pay attention to that stuff because there will be some opportunities for the Kingdom coming through that. This is a really tough one, because, freedom and unity, that's who we are. But sometimes we kind of forget to look after each other. So there's that, again, that Vermont exceptionalism where we all pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and really refuse to ask for help until it's almost too late. So I think getting these community conversations going is a great place to start. Start with we had Shoshana Davis, who's the state director for Racial Diversity do a 3-hour Zoom training earlier this week with our staff. And she was great. So I would definitely look to her as a resource if your community is struggling with some of these issues. And it also will require us to address our own inherent privilege and whiteness. And so that's a struggle. But that's a good part of the struggle. So definitely look to the Community Foundation for grant opportunities. Our Spark Connecting Communities is another grant opportunity. That deadline is coming up super quick, or well, kind of quick, October 15th. And those are grants up to $3,000, and they're all about building social capital. And I think that is a key to unity, is a thriving social capital within your community. And how you get there are many different ways, but you engage people, you engage youth. The VCRD process, the Community Foundation has supported that relatively robustly for a number of years. And it's because we believe in what this model does. And it really is about bringing people together around common issues and concerns and creating that sense of unity and showing a community how it can move itself forward.
Great, thanks, Kevin. We're kind of at the end of our time here, but Jacob, I just wanted to give you a second if you wanted to throw out a thought or two.
I'll just
really describing this conversation.
I'll be really quick, Catherine. But I think it's great that Kevin opened up with some of the heavier divides and the weight of the national news that we're thinking about. And I think we all kind of feel that heaviness in our own lives, whether we're facing childcare challenges like we heard about, or loneliness or income loss, or even facing our own neighbors online that are different people than we've interacted with in person. And there are these tensions in our communities, whether it's masks or not masks, or workers versus not, or racism and policing. And one thing that really stuck out to me was just the importance of institutions, where we worship, our schools, our hubs, your own families. That's what I really heard from the group tonight, and how important those spaces where we make connections are, and how important, particularly from Trish, to break across the invisible boundaries that we might think about to create those unlikely partnerships. And even though we're all feeling really heavy and weighed down, and sometimes don't know where to go or what to do next, but that push and pivot is exactly, I think, what we need to do. And it was inspirational to hear some of the things that are happening in Orleans County on local foods, and what you're thinking about access to technology, education and training, and food access. And this is one of those spaces that, and what VCRD does so well. But I think coming together and breaking through more unity is about how do we make this process and planning and talking and going through those tough conversations a part of our habit as a community. And it's hard. But I will say there are lots of resources out there to do that. I know Kevin talked about some. We're going to have our municipal planning grants due at October 1st. They're really flexible state funding. We fund a ton of great projects in the Northeast Kingdom. NVDA is a wonderful resource. Eileen Nagel or Allison Lowe there can help put together applications, and they can convene community conversations to try to figure out, how do we take this next step? How do we get people together? So I know I was more than a minute, Catherine, but this was so inspiring. I know I'm feeling heavy. I'm a city councilor in Barrie, and it's just, going to another Zoom meeting is always tough, right? It's when you're in front of the computer all day, but I felt really inspired by this group. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you all for these contributions, this reflection and visioning about where we are and where we might want to go. And most literally, and I think next we want to go back to the full conversation and share a little bit about what came up for all of us here and the reflections that we heard. Jenna, will you remind us about how we get back?
I just posted the link for the closing session in the chat. It's also the same as the opening session. So if you just go back to where you started earlier and you leave this meeting and enter that one, and we'll see you back there.
All right, so thank you all, and see you all on the other side.
We're really eager to hear the results of the conversations from the two rooms. Catherine, would you be willing to go first and describe the conversation around building community unity?
Yeah, thanks. We had a great room and a great conversation about this question of what is building community unity. I'm surrounded by small children at the end of the night, so there may be some disharmony in the background as well. But you know, I think one major piece was first that just building unity means a lot of different things in a lot of different ways, from food access to support for our local businesses to community spaces for everyone to gather and to think about addressing systemic racism and creating a welcoming, inclusive Vermont. We talked a little bit about some of the barriers that Orleans County faces, like financial insecurity, and many Vermonters spending much of their time and energy caring and attending to their basic needs. We talked about the geography, which is really spread out and isolated. We talked about the lack of connectivity and the lack of broadband that makes it difficult for us to connect, especially in this challenging world. And we talked a little bit about the kind of kingdom grit, where maybe we're used to accepting less, and that becomes a sort of mindset where we just sort of accept some of the challenges that our region faces instead of coming together and imagining big. I can help you in a minute, but I'm talking with a lot of people on this call right now. So then we shifted to thinking about what we might want to see for our community. We talked about having courageous conversations and spaces where we really sought to listen and to understand across difference, and to build on our social capital and existing networks to help strengthen a sense of unity. We talked about physical spaces to build unity, like community hubs where it was easy to access multiple services in one place in a way that's trauma-informed and human-centered, and how schools and other institutions play a vital role in supporting and fostering that sense of unity. We talked about police reform. We talked about increasing food access. We spent a fair amount of time reflecting on technology and how we might increase access to broadband, and also provide navigators who can help Vermonters understand how to use technology and ensure that everyone has the equipment that they need. And we also sort of spent some time reflecting on how to center those that we want to serve in our community, and making sure that everyone is heard and everyone is a part of the conversation for building the kind of community that we want for ourselves here in the kingdom. And I'll leave it right there and then put myself on mute.
Thank you so much, Catherine. You know, nobody is ever sad to see someone else's rambunctious children. In fact, it's part of the heart and soul of what we get to experience now, being in each other's homes. So thank you for that. I want to ask Nick Kramer from VCRD to overview briefly the discussion on housing.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Paul. So unsurprisingly, we also had a really great in-depth conversation. Really felt lucky to be a part of it. We started by thinking through some of the challenges related to housing in the area. I mean, clearly there's been a housing crisis since before COVID, and now there's still a housing crisis, right? There's some of these challenges are enduring. The lack of housing stock, older housing stock that needs rehabilitation, funding challenges, geography, et cetera. But pretty quickly we transitioned into thinking long-term about what would the dream look like? What would the goal be in this arena? And there were some really crystal visions that rose to the top. We talked a lot about the need to think about the allocation of state funding, the sustainability of housing programs and how do they self-fund, the need for partnerships between a number of different organizations, and kind of in an ideal world, housing exists as one piece of a greater social support ecosystem where there's integrated services with transportation and everything else individuals and families need. So We talked about the need for a diversity of housing stock, given some differences between individuals and families. So a lot of really great ideas rose to the surface. I think maybe even more inspiringly, it's clear that there's a lot of people with some really great ideas and deep knowledge working on this topic in the area. One of the longest sections was what's already happening on the ground that could be scalable or replicable. So we talked about local landlords who have been helpful in helping to rehab larger developments or larger chunks of housing stock for which they're responsible, and partnering with local agencies. We talked about SASH, a program to help older adults stay at home into their older age. The Continuum of Care Networks are an innovative program in St. Johnsbury that helps landlords kind of make preemptive improvements to their properties and create a little bit of a risk pool. So, and great ideas for the future. We talked about need for tax relief, repurposing state land, rethinking some of our regulations, and really just not reinventing the wheel, but seizing on what's already working and leveraging that forward and trying to double down in our partnerships and our communication and really bring the public dialogue about housing to a larger stage. So really a great conversation to be a part of, and want to thank everybody for making it happen.
Thank you so much, Nick. So this is the third of the Northeast Kingdom sessions, and I want to thank the NEK Collaborative and NVDA for their leadership, as well as everyone who was on the steering committee that framed the issues. It was interesting that building community unity and housing came last, but are probably as fundamental as any other conversation, and there are conversations everywhere in Vermont. I want to turn it to Jenna Kolosky to share how we get back to you and what comes next, and then we'll conclude in just a few minutes.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. Just really quickly, next steps. So tomorrow morning, you'll see an email from me that will have a survey link. If you have anything else to add to the conversation that you weren't able to add tonight, feel free to fill that out. But also, we'd invite you to send that out to your networks and share with others that weren't on the call, because we'll want to continue to receive input and hear from people all around the region. So you'll see that, but then later you'll see a follow-up that captures all of the notes from tonight's discussion. It captures the input from the survey, and then also contact information for the visiting team members. I'll just say, and this is the third Kingdom Forum, we did make a decision to put all of that information together. So you'll also see notes and visiting team contacts from the Caledonia County Forum and from Essex, and so it'll all be there in one place, as well as thanks to Kingdom Access for recording. There'll be recordings from the sessions of these three forums. So you should see that within the next couple of weeks.
Thank you so much, Jenna. So we're seeing similar themes in these conversations all across the state. We're also seeing a lot of faces of people who are absolutely dedicated to the future of their communities. And we're hearing things like people saying, we're working with as much discipline and energy as we possibly can to form as good as strong plans for recovery as we can in the face of complete uncertainties about when those plans go into effect and what's going to come next as we approach the fall and the next year. And the tension that people are under as they're trying to move forward, both at the household level where people are juggling their children, juggling school, juggling their concerns about COVID return. At the same time, they're trying to work at home, pay their bills, care for their neighbors. And this is a tough time for a lot of families, but it's also a tremendous time of collective purpose, unity, and common direction in terms of pulling together as a society to combat COVID and to build a better future for us. Everyone says we're not going back to the normal, whatever that was before COVID. And in fact, we need to look at this time as a crucible in which we construct a transformative path of moving Vermont forward. One of the things that didn't come up much in the housing conversation that I think is interesting is we didn't talk much about home ownership. we talked a lot about the systems that are in place to help produce affordable housing or potentially fix up housing. But one of the fundamental challenges we need to think about as we come out of COVID is how we help people build equity, and how we look at how we help people move out of poverty. Middle-class people move out of poverty because their parents help them put a down payment on a house. And low-income people don't have that support. They don't have the down payment. And so in the game of life, they never get to where their equity is growing because they have a stake in our communities. And so I think there's a huge conversation yet to be had. And I'm really delighted by the way this conversation teed up so much. I also would say to Catherine and the Northeast Kingdom Collaborative and NVDA, you know, it's awesome what you folks are doing. And the more you do, the more people are going to say, we need you folks to help us structure the next phase of the collaborative conversation around housing or these other issues. And that's the trouble with leadership. And I'm not trying to put anything on you right now, but I do really appreciate the great work that's going on in the kingdom today. I don't know when the kingdom has had the momentum it's got now with all the challenges. It's just pretty impressive, the work that everyone's doing together. So thanks everyone for being on this call. It's been a great evening. Thank you for the visiting team who put in an extra half day on top of their long days of work. We deeply appreciate you being there for people in the kingdom. And we'll go on and thread together to keep moving Vermont forward and to be Vermont strong. So thanks everyone for being part of the conversation tonight. Take care.